It's nice to see you all again. It sounds like from what Dr. Melky said, people are staying up too late. Having a good time, I hope. The lab's okay? Yeah, good. I am back to frighten you all again. I seem to have gotten the lectures this year that are about, things that we worry about, right? Concentration of the media, corporate monopolistic control of information. And today we're going to talk about something even more personal, which is privacy and data, right? And the data that's produced in the world, particularly about us, and what's done with that data, right? And so we live in an age of sort of a tension between our desire and our increasing frequency of use of personal technology that's connected to the web, and also the feeling that we're probably being watched, and we're probably being tracked, and the things that people know about us are probably being sold to other people, right, for lots of reasons, some of which we may understand, others that we may not, okay? So my goal today is to give you another sort of framework for your classrooms, for your research, for your journalism that will help you maybe think about privacy and data in some new ways that maybe you haven't considered before, so that when you go back to your classrooms and your newsrooms and the places that you work, as well as in your personal lives, maybe you're thinking a little bit more critically about how we use technology, and also about privacy, and whether we feel like privacy is something that's still important in the digital age, okay? So I'm gonna start by asking you guys a question, and we don't have to do a lot of back and forth, but I'd like to know what you think. We hear this term a lot, big data, right? This is something maybe you've heard people talk about. We live in the age of big data. What do we mean? What's big data? Anybody? The internet? In what way? In everything. All of it. Yeah. YouTube, Wikipedia, right? User-generated content as we think of it, right? Things that we put into the web. Yeah.
المحتوى الإعلامي وقواعد البيانات.
Okay. Media content and databases, right? Somebody else had their hand up? Okay, he said it. So I think, yes, right, all of these things. And as I was thinking about how to talk with you all about big data, because it sounds very vague, right? It just is like this thing maybe hanging over us. We hear that it's in the cloud. What was little data? Was there an age of small data? Yeah. When it was hard copy, when it was analog maybe, right? When it was written down. And I think it's interesting if we just think about, remember those when we didn't have smartphones? Some of you probably don't remember. And we didn't have the internet. Maybe we just had a phone in our kitchen. How much data were you producing about yourself in any given day? Data that was stored somewhere, collected. Very little, right? Like you make a phone call. Well, that goes into a database somewhere, right? And what data do we have about that phone call? The time, the number that you called from, and then the number that you called, the duration of the call, right? This is what we think of as metadata, right? The actual data information would have been what you talked about, right? And that's what we think of as very private, right? The content of your call. So maybe five pieces of information, and maybe you make a few calls a day, so 20 pieces of information. Well, let's contrast that to today. How many of you have been online this morning? Okay, and did you visit more than 5 websites? Okay, how many of you have used social media this morning? Okay, how many of you have mobile phones? And how many of those phones have GPS? Okay, this group has produced a lot of data this morning. A lot of data in just one morning, right? The website you went to, how long you were on that site, what computer you accessed that site from, where you were before you went to that site, where you went to after that site, what you did while you were on that site, the pieces of that page that you looked at, right? If you were on social media, what friends you were looking at, that entire network, what were those friends doing, right? What were they doing after that, right? Where have you been, right? You were at your hotel this morning, you walked to the school, that's a piece of data, right? You're now sitting in here. All of this data is being produced. So this is what we mean, right? The amount of data in the world has expanded so exponentially that it's hard to get your head around it. And, excuse me, Paul actually stole one of my web links that I was going to show you, but you saw it, right? Remember the page? In 1 second, here's how many Google searches, right? Every Google search that you do is a piece of data, right? The results, and it's connected to you, right? Whether or not you're logged in, every single piece of technology that's connected to the internet has an IP address, right? Which identifies that particular piece of technology, and it tells the internet where you are, what's going on, right? What you're looking at, etc. So that's what we mean. And if you saw that list, it's incredible, right? And so then the question becomes, what does all of this data have to do with privacy? Because as we get further into it, you'll see privacy is incredibly important. And why should we care? Okay, so these are some of the things I want to deal with this morning. This is global ICT penetration, internet communication technologies since 2001. Pretty rapid growth, particularly amongst mobile and cell phone subscription, right? But at this point, almost half of the world is connected to the internet, nearly about 40%. This line here is particularly important. This is smartphone subscriptions, right? So 32% of the globe now has a smartphone, which has GPS, right? And as we talk more about smartphones, we'll start to think that, there's hardly anything more personal or private in the digital age than your phone, right? It's also the most vulnerable, but it knows everything about you. Your phone knows everything about you, where you've been, who you've called, who's in your networks, what kind of photos have you been taking, right? Your banking information, your health information, it has everything is on that phone. Sorry. And then especially when we think about Web 2.0, is that a term that people are familiar with? Somewhat. What is Web 2.0? What was Web 1.0? Yeah, 1.0. Just the websites, right? Web pages. You went to the web page and you looked up some information. So what's Web 2.0? Social media, user-generated content, right? When the web became not something that we just got information from, but something that we put information on, right? And this was really a big change, because early models of the internet were sort of like the old media model. Somebody has a website, or a radio station, or a newspaper, or a TV station, right? And they would send us information. All of a sudden, we can share information, move it around, give it to other people, right? Interact with the web, and that's what we think of as Web 2.0. And now there's Web 3.0, we don't have to get into it. But for my discussion today, this idea of Web 2.0 is important. Interactivity, right? And the rise of user-generated content. There's 7+ billion people on Earth. 4 billion have access to mobile phones, 1 billion more after 2 years. By contrast, only about 2/5, it's a little bit more of the world has web access. And this is just a meme that I thought was funny. It says, we wanted them smaller, right? This is early mobile phones, until we could take selfies. Then we wanted them bigger again. So this is what cell phones did. They got smaller, 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 and then we said, oh, we can take pictures of ourselves and share them, and then we wanted them bigger again. Right? But kind of as the growth of user-generated content has expanded, and so what I'm particularly interested in is location, right? Because I feel like all of that data that we were just talking about, yeah, there's some location built into it, but your GPS and mobile phones has really become so integral to what we think about when we're on our technologies, right? And so we have lots of apps that use our location, right? Foursquare, which was big for a while, still around, Google Maps, obviously, right? You have to tell Google where you are so it can tell you how to get where you want to go. Google needs to know, right? Uber, you gotta let Uber know where you are. I know that Uber hasn't quite really exploded maybe in this part of the world yet, but it will. And it's everywhere in the United States. You need to give them your location. Yik Yak, I don't know if this came out here, but this is basically an anonymous messaging app that young people usually use. And it uses your location to make comments anonymously about people around you, right? There's been huge issues with these kind of apps in high schools in the United States. Because imagine if you can just say anything you want anonymously about somebody in the same room and you're 17 or 15, right? A lot of problems crop up. Yelp, right? Rate a restaurant. Where are you? You're at a restaurant. Tinder, right? Heard of Tinder, maybe? A dating app, a text-based dating app, right? Who's around me? Who wants to go out? Swipe left, swipe right, okay? And all of this, right? All of these new technologies that are web-based and use GPS and use all of this data can be used for really interesting and important work. In Zimbabwe, for instance, a text-based messaging app that uses location was used to monitor illegal forestry, right? So there are old growth forests in Africa with lots of hardwood, trees that can be sold for thousands of dollars. People go in, they cut them down, and they're all disappearing. They won't grow back, they're hundreds of years old. And so this company and UNICEF teamed up to say, hey, if you're out in the forest and you have a text, you don't need a smartphone, just texting, text where the location is if you see illegal forestry, illegal cutting, and we'll go and check on it. And it made a real impact on people's ability to monitor illegal forestry. And also during disaster, text-based, GPS-based monitoring can be incredibly useful. This is a group called Ushahidi. Maybe some of you have heard of it. It was first developed in Africa, also in Zimbabwe during some post-election violence, where there was a disputed election. Nobody could agree on who had won, and there was really incredible violence. 1,200 people died because there was real disputes about what party was going to run the country, right? I'm sure this sounds familiar. And Ushahidi developed this system where you could text, hey, there's violence at this polling station. There's a checkpoint here. Here's where you can go if the violence breaks out and you need safety. So during the earthquake in Haiti, if you remember in 2010, it was very big news in my part of the world because I'm from Florida. There's a huge Haitian American community where I live, and this was one of the worst natural disasters in history, and you could argue that it was man-made as well. 200,000 people died, millions left homeless, an entire city destroyed. And Ushahidi used their software to share information, really important information with people. There's somebody trapped in a building. There's a broken gas line that could explode, right? There's food and water supplies here. This building is very dangerous. Don't go into it, it could collapse, right? Very, very useful. Everybody used it, including the US military, who were some of the first on the scene, the US Marines, to help try to save people, pull them out of buildings. They were using Ushahidi because it was real time, it was citizen-based, it was all you need was a text phone, you don't have to have a smartphone, just text to this number, this is what I see, and they put it on a map, and all of this big data, right, this is a great visualization of big data, came together to make a real difference. So that's the good part. Can also get a little bit tricky, and you have to be careful. This is from iPhoto. So if you have a Macintosh, this is some software that comes with your computer. Other computers are similar. And what this does is it shows you a map of all your photos, right? So photos, when you take them with a phone, are tagged unless you turn it off with the location, right? You knew this, maybe? Every photo you take on your phone has a location in it, a longitude and a latitude. And it's pretty exact. It's exactly where that is. Unless you turn it off, it tends to be the default. Your photo is tagged, and so you can create a map like this. And this can get very tricky because sometimes you forget that those photos are tagged, and then you share them out. So this was one story about a well-known television host in the United States on a show called Mythbusters. And a pretty famous guy, and he was really happy because he bought a new Jeep. And so he took a picture of the Jeep and he put it on Twitter, and it was right in front of his house. So all of a sudden he had shared with the world where he lived. Now, that's not a big deal for most people, but if you're fairly famous, that can be a problem. People show up, want to talk to you, got a great idea for a show, hey, I want your autograph, what are you doing, want to have lunch, right? People who are fairly famous tend to value their anonymity and don't really want people to know where they are. I would argue we all value that, right? But I don't have a lot of people show up to my house, I don't know about you, but he did, and it was a problem, right? But not necessarily dangerous, and he got through it, but I'm sure he never did it again. But all of a sudden, something that he considered to be very private, his address, became very public because he has a lot of followers on Twitter, right? Another incident. This was a little more serious. So there's a guy named McAfee. Some of you probably recognize that name, McAfee, if you have a Windows computer. It's the security software that goes on your computer. So it was developed by this guy named McAfee, who's also kind of a shady character. Like, he's always involved in weird things. And he was actually wanted by the US government for connections with the murder. He wasn't accused of the murder, but they wanted to talk to him, and he left the country, and he went to Belize. And Vice, which is a journalistic group, does kind of gonzo reporting. They go around reporting on wars and black markets and prostitution and criminality, the kind of stories that maybe other people don't follow. They got a scoop. They found out where this guy was. They contacted him. He agreed to an interview. So if you're a journalist, that's a big deal. You're going to go talk to a pretty famous guy who's hiding from the US government in the jungles of Belize. They were so excited when they got there that they took a picture and they tweeted it out. And the US government was like, well, there he is, right? And they went and they got him. He ran to Guatemala, but we have an extradition treaty with Guatemala. He's now in the United States awaiting trial, right? Great, they caught the guy, but if you're a journalist, bad news, right? I mean, as journalists, what do we value? We have to be trustworthy, right? If we want people to talk to us, they have to know that they're not going to end up in jail because of something fairly stupid, right, that we did, okay? So the point that I'm trying to make is that our ideas of privacy, our ideas of what is shared and what isn't, have started to change, right? What's going on in this picture? She's having a conversation on her phone in public, fairly loud, right? That maybe we would have thought of as private. Is this familiar? Yes. Annoying? Yes. but does it happen all the time? Yeah. And like this woman cares, right? What about him? Does he care? He doesn't care. He's listening to music. We're all kind of now in our own little worlds, right? Absorbed in our phone, maybe having a conversation that we wouldn't share otherwise, and yet we are, right? So personally, there is a shift, right? People are more and more willing to share information, and sometimes that information gets out in ways that we wouldn't expect, right? And so things we think, again, this division between the public and the private, what we used to think of as sort of a wall, has become very permeable, right? It's very easy for things to go back and forth between that wall in ways we might have not have expected before. This is a website, I don't know if it's still around, facebookcheating.com. Something like half of all divorces now in the United States involve social media. Half. So people, their marriage falls apart, they go to the judge, and the judge's like, I need to see those tweets, I need to see those text messages, I need to see that Facebook post. And that's how the wife found out, because the husband forgot to log out of Facebook. And she opens up his computer, and there's the messages from his girlfriend from high school, who he just reconnected with, and now they're together, right? So Facebook cheating became a site, because we love this stuff, right? People love to read about this. It's wonderful, right? But it happens. Sometimes we do really dumb things, like this girl. On Facebook, she posted that she hates her job, she hates her boss, he's always making her do stuff that pisses her off, like her work. And her boss responds, "Hi, I guess you forgot about adding me on here." He says, "Don't flatter yourself, you've worked here. You know I don't prance around the office." Oh, she said that he's gay. She's like, "You didn't know that, obviously." Thirdly, that blank stuff you call is your job. That's what I pay you to do. And by the way, don't come in tomorrow, right? Private conversation, right? The kind of thing you would say with your coworker after work over a beer. She decided to put it on Facebook, forgot that her boss was also her friend on Facebook, and she lost her job. Uber came out with this about a year and a half ago. It says, Uber removes racy blog posts on prostitution and one-night stands. So the data people at Uber, right? Uber creates a lot of data, right? Pickup time, drop-off time, location. You go somewhere, you get dropped off, you call an Uber a few hours later, you return, right? And what they realize that there are very interesting patterns, right? Somebody calls an Uber at 2 a.m. from a bar. They go to one address, they're there for a couple hours. They get another Uber, they go home. They're like, we know what happened, right? Oh, or you're going into sort of an area that's known for prostitution. And they get an Uber into that area, and then a couple hours later, and it's late at night, and they get an Uber home. And Uber thought this was really funny. This was like a joke post. But it really freaked people out. Because they're like, wait a second. So somebody's sitting in a room tracking all of that information, right? Everything that you're doing when you use an Uber. Of course they are, right? It's how they make the service work. But oftentimes we don't like to know that they're watching and that they're looking and that they're paying attention. And so they removed it because a lot of people freaked out. And they're like, that's what you're using it for, right? Jad shared this with me yesterday, which I hadn't seen this graph before. But it says, have you ever rejected a candidate, so this is a boss, right? Somebody who's gonna hire someone, because of something you saw about them on a social networking site? 70% said yes. 70% said they hadn't hired someone because they Googled their name and the first thing that came up was maybe an inappropriate photo or an inappropriate comment or content about them drinking, drunk at a bar. Like, is that who you're gonna hire? Maybe not. Posted content about them using drugs. See, all of these things that we may have done in private, that we may have talked with our friends about, suddenly we've decided that we should share them on Facebook, or Twitter, or Instagram, or wherever. Posted negative comments about a previous employer, demonstrated poor communication skills, made discriminatory comments, lied about their qualifications, shared confidential information from a previous, right? So you get it. And I talk with my students about this all the time, right? Those things you're posting now in college, when you start going to look for jobs, people are gonna look at that. They're gonna Google your name, they're gonna try to figure out who you are, right? And now we have real data to back that up, that is indeed happening. And so we have to be more critical, right? We have to think more closely about what all of this means. Because otherwise we end up doing things that are potentially harmful. Those things that we thought were private are no longer that. So I want to show you a short video that was produced a couple of years ago. And I apologize, it has subtitles in English, and then it has different languages. But I think even if you're not able to follow the subtitles, you'll get the gist of the video.
Insekten. Wat lief? Volgens mij insekten op je rug. Kan dat? Ja, vlinders. Slovenië? Slovenië? Nee, moto. Oranje. Pas erop. Zenit. Oui, oui, bien. Je hebt een vriendin. Julie de... Ja. Boeiend liefdesleven. 3, 4.
De vierde, daar zei ik. Wie staat over? Dus dat weten niet veel mensen.
Is er eens piers voor? Maison Rouge, balkon. Ja. Ik zie geld, ik zie transacties, maar ik heb geen rekeningnummer van buiten. Ik denk dat ik het wel weet. Er staat wel negatief op uw bankrekening.
Ja?
7. Last month, you spent 200 euros on alcohol. Vorige maand 300 euro aan kleding gespendeerd. 8. 5. Voor een huis dat van eigenaar gaat veranderen. 750.000 euro. Ja, eigenlijk. 41.
Ja.
Juist.
Ja, inderdaad. Oh my god. Oh man. Ah, dat is heel eng.
Your life is online. Okay, that's the point of the video. It comes from a bank, which, you know, makes sense, right? We keep a lot of our accounting information online. It's one of the most important things about us, right? It's where you keep your money. If somebody gets into that, your money's gonna disappear, okay? Or they're gonna pretend they're you to spend your money, right? But their point was much broader, right? Everything about you can be found if you are constantly living your life online, which, as we talked about this morning, just a few minutes ago, we've all been online multiple times just today. We've all produced data about ourselves just this morning. That can be accessed, right? Whether legally or illegally, it's all there. So then the question becomes, well, if it's all public, well then what's private? What do we mean by private, right? What do we say when we want our privacy, when we expect some sort of privacy? What do you guys think? When I say the word privacy, what does that mean to you? Do you have it? Do you expect it? No? Why not? We have lost it. So personally, she thinks it's impossible to achieve privacy, so we might as well embrace the web, right? Open yourself up, put it out there. Anybody else? Any other? Yes? Oh, okay. Sorry, I have to give you the mic. I forgot you.
الخصوصية ممكن إنه تكون هل أنا متزوج أم أعزب؟ هل أنا غني أم فقير؟ العمر، عمر الشخص، ممكن إنه أكتب إنه عمري 21 سنة بينما أنا عمري 40 سنة. الخصوصية ممكن إنه أكون متعلم أو غير متعلم. مكان العيش ممكن انه انا اكتب مكان في منطقة راقية بينما انا اسكن في منطقة فقيرة.
So very good point about I could say a lot of things about myself that maybe aren't true, but that's my right. I could say I'm young when actually I'm old. I could say I'm rich when actually I'm poor, and that's actually my right to say those things. And I shouldn't have to tell everybody in the world that information, right? Yeah, it's a very good point.
أنا رأيي الشخصي في الموضوع إنه الخصوصية مصطلح فضفاض نوعا ما، مصطلح نسبي. يعني كل ما كان الواحد شخصية عامة أكثر، كل ما اضطر إنه خصوصيته تقل. فبتوقع الأمر مش بيد الشخص.
Right, so privacy is a relative term. So people who are famous have lower expectations of privacy than those who are not. And that's a really good point. And we get into that in US law a lot, and I think around the world, whether your privacy has been invaded often depends on whether you're a politician, a rock star, right? That your expectations of privacy are lowered, right? I'll take one more. I think you had your hand up.
I just want to say that talking about privacy is just like talking about objectivity when we are talking about journalism. There is nothing called objectivity and there is nothing called privacy. Being, having your own secrets or going on public has been done years ago, and social media and the new platforms just makes things easier. If we can recall what's called the black hackers, the black hats and the white hats.
Black hats and white
Even
hats.
if you are setting all your Facebook account for being private, dispatching all your social media platforms from being linked to each other, a kid who is 15 years old with some YouTube video channels and some videos can invade your privacy, and he can get all what you have, all what you want from all your accounts. The idea is here is what you are sharing and how you are sharing it.
Okay, good. So I know there were some other hands up, but I want to keep moving, and then we'll leave some time at the end for comments, because I know this is, when we start really thinking about it, we become sort of passionate, right? It's like, well, I want some privacy. I want to be able to maintain my anonymity. I want to be able to tell the world that I'm one thing when I'm not. There's some things that I should be able to hold private. Whether we can or not is the question, but I think inside all of us hope that at some point in our bedroom at night, when we're reading a book, that we're on our own, that somebody's not watching us, right? That there isn't somebody looking in our window. That's an expectation of privacy. That somebody's not going to knock on the door and just come into our house, right? That within our homes, with the door closed, we're private. We're in a private home, right? So I want to ask you, did these people have an expectation of privacy? And let's just say, I mean, this is European, but let's say this is the 13th or 14th century, long before what we think of as sort of Western liberal democracies. Did the folks outside of this gate, you know, let's say that the nobles, the gentry, the monarchy lives inside of the gates, and all of these folks sort of are in landed peonage to those who are inside. Did they have an expectation of privacy within their homes? No. They didn't. They really didn't. Probably not for the most part, especially if you were not of the sort of landed class, if you were not of the elite, if you were of the not elite, if you were poor, if you were indentured or a slave, you had no expectations of privacy, right? So when we think about privacy, really we're thinking about modernity, right? The modern age. This idea that we have privacy, or even that we're all individuals, right? Not just part of some group that can be used the way it needs to be used by those who are in power. That's new, right? That's an outcome of modernity, right? Where we think about these things, and it's different country to country, and I'm going to talk specifically about the United States because that's where I'm from, but also because a lot of the questions about privacy in the digital age have grown up around technologies and companies that are in the US, right? And the work of the US government in terms of surveillance. Right? But in the United States, we fought a war over privacy, right? Part of what the US Revolution was about was search and seizure. This idea that the Queen's men could come to your house at any time, break down your door, and take all of your things was something that in the United States, you know, in the colonies at the time, was rejected. They said, we don't believe in that. Right? We're reading about liberal democracy and what that means, and we think that it's not okay for there not to be any privacy. And so when we had the war and we wrote the Constitution, we wrote an amendment about privacy, right? We put it into law because we felt that strongly about it. So the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution says this: the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects, right? All those personal things that we were just talking about, right? Your age, how much money you make, all of this personal data, against unreasonable searches and seizures, right? Things that are arbitrary, without warning, and shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue, right? A warrant, which is the idea that I can come to your house and say, I have a warrant to search your house, But upon probable cause, you have to have a reason. There has to be some good reason that somebody comes into your house and searches through your private things. Supported by oath or affirmation, so through a legal system, you go to a judge, you say, hey, I want to go into this person's house because I believe they're going to commit an act or they have committed a criminal act that's dangerous to everyone else, right? And the judge will then decide, yes, you can have the warrant, or no, you don't have probable cause, right? The judge can just as easily say, no, you can't go into this person's home, right? And particularly describing the place to be searched, so you have to be very clear, right? You can't just say, I want to search this person's car and their office and their home and their mom's apartment. No, you have to say, I'm going to search their car. I'm going to search their home, right? So you have to be specific, and the persons or things to be seized. So you even have to be very specific about what it is you're looking for, okay? And there are laws similar to this around the world, right, that talk about our right against unreasonable seizure. This is from the Lebanese Constitution, which doesn't specifically mention privacy as specifically as the United States Constitution, but it does talk about your right to not be arrested, grabbed off of the street, right, without probable cause, without some strong reason presented by those in authority, right, that they have the suspicion that you are going to do something that will hurt or cause harm to other people around you, right? That's how we hope societies work. So this is really important, right? And I think why in the US issues of privacy and data have become so big, and we'll talk more about like Edward Snowden and the revelations that the US government was keeping data on everybody, is that blurring between what's public and what's private has meant that it's very easy for people to gather information about you that they would have needed a warrant to do in the past. And now oftentimes those warrants are not being gathered, right? So this is the real tension, right? And we can laugh about it and say, oh, well, it's funny, that person got fired because they shared that, or, you know, yeah, they may be looking through all of my data, but I'm not doing anything wrong, so I don't have to worry, right? But it's a pretty strong concern, right? Because it is something that I think around the world, not just in Western liberal democracies, but around the world, in the 21st century, most people do expect that their privacy will be protected and that the legal system will help them to be protected. And as we see that crumble, that's where the real concerns emerge. So I want to just talk about what I call the three facets of privacy in the digital age, okay? And these are my own, so you can cite me if you use it. TMI, maybe you've heard this, too much information, okay? Just everything that's out there. Data tracking and gathering that has commercial incentive, right? Why is the data being gathered? And how is it being sold, used, etc. Okay, so within a market system, how is data being used? And data tracking and gathering by the government, usually under the guise or under the pretense of security, right? Especially post 9/11, September 11th, in the United States, right? This has been a big issue. We have to gather the data to keep people safe, okay? So these are sort of what I think of three facets. So under TMI, there are some subcategories, right? The first one we might just call silly, okay? Nobody cares what you had for breakfast, but we share it all the time. I'm out with my friends, we're having some drinks, I'm on my way to the airport, now I'm in my car, like, it's just constant updates, right? About things happening in your life that before you probably wouldn't have called all your friends, right? To say like, hey, I'm in a taxi. But now you're like, in a taxi, share, right? So, silly, right? But it's okay. You can block those people if you don't want to see any more pictures of their kid, right? That's okay. Hey, 70 pictures of your baby? Too much, okay? And there are apps actually where they will replace pictures of kids with like cars. Somebody came out with that for a while. Because, you know, after a while, you're like, okay, your life's wonderful. We get it. Oh, you're on vacation. That's fantastic. And I'm stuck in my job, right? But it's silly and it's mostly harmless unless it's depressing because you're like, why are they always on vacation? And I'm here, right? Paul showed a video yesterday about the guy talking about his life, right? Having a great time, right? When clearly he was not. More serious TMI, right? Cyberbullying, okay? Risk to minors, stupid criminal behavior, okay? I mentioned the app for that young people have been using. Yik Yak is just the latest one. Anonymous, location-based messaging, right? Which again, remember what junior high was like when you were 12 or 13, the way you talk about each other. Now imagine that being shared with everyone in your school, right, anonymously, and it's led to huge issues. And there have been really serious issues of cyberbullying in the United States, some of which have led to suicide. Just in Florida, 2 years ago, a young girl killed herself after she was bullied for 2 years at her school, right? I have students every semester in my class who say that they knew somebody who had to leave their school because of that picture of her at a party doing something inappropriate that everybody had seen, right? And as soon as and even worse, she went to another school, and as soon as she got there, somebody saw her and that's the girl, I saw the picture, and then they share it, she had to leave again. And I'm using her, it's happened to boys too, but in those instances, it's often young women, right? So it can be more serious, right? This TMI can be more serious. Risk to minors, young people connecting with other people online, thinking that it's, some 14-year-old boy, but really it's a 40-year-old man who is a pedophile, right? Who preys on young girls or young boys, right? So it can be much more serious. And then there's sort of unthinking and uncritical, ways that we can share a lot of information without realizing the way that the information we share can be connected and put together. So I want to show you a website that was built using Facebook graph search, okay? So, one of the reasons that Facebook is such a powerful and wealthy company, right? They make billions of dollars every year, is because of how much information they have, right? So much data, and they're an advertiser's dream. Right? So imagine you're a young person, you're starting a shoe company in Beirut on Hamra, and the shoes that you're selling cost between $50 and $100, and they're a certain design, and you're aiming them for women ages 25 to 37. Facebook can give you a group of people who match that category exactly, right? They shop on Hamra, they've posted about it. They've looked at shoes that are in the price range that you're selling, they have the data on that. They know how old you are, they know where you live. That's so valuable, right? Imagine that compared to a newspaper ad where you just put the ad in the paper and it goes out, right? And then you hope that the people you want to see the ad see it, but you don't know. Facebook can tell you, hey, here's 700 women that match that exactly, and we can put your advertisement right in their Facebook feed. Right? So a couple years ago, Facebook said, hey, we should make Facebook Graph available to everyone, right? If I'm on Facebook and I want to go to the movies on Friday night, and it's a Coen Brothers movie, this is a pair of directors from the United States, kind of popular, but not everybody likes their movies, and I want to go out on Friday to the 10 o'clock show, I should be able to look in my Facebook group and say, hey, who among my friends likes the Coen Brothers, right? Likes going to the movies, is available on Friday night, and is in the area, is around.
Facebook offers that now even without even prompting.
They'll do it, yeah, they'll do it without even prompt.
If you check in some place, they'll tell you, this person are.
Absolutely. So if you just for the translator, if you're on Facebook and you check in somewhere, they'll say, hey, you've got some friends around. And they're friends who like the place that you're at and really enjoy the fattoush where you're at, right? It's my favorite dish. So great, here you go, right? So there was a comedian in the UK who heard about this, and he started thinking about what that really might mean. What does that really look like? What does Facebook graph search really look like if we're being critical, if we're thinking closely about what you could find, what kind of information you could find, just searching through Facebook, all the people on Facebook. So we started putting together some searches, okay? I'm gonna share them with you. Some of them are a little off color, I'm just a warning, but nothing too offensive, I hope. So the first one he did, or the first one that he shared was, mothers of, oh, whoops, sorry. I forgot. I have to exit out of this. So this is the site, actual Facebook graph searches. So So the first one he did was mothers of Jews who like bacon, and you could just as easily put Muslim there, right? Who eat pork, right? So you eat pork, but you know you're not supposed to, and you wouldn't want your mother to know, right? And so here he looked in and he got everybody who said that they are Jewish and also have liked bacon somewhere on the web, and who are their mothers. Okay, so potentially you could send messages to all of those mothers and say, hey, did you know that your son or your daughter has been eating bacon? Okay, not so bad, but maybe you wouldn't want her to know. Okay, she thinks that you're very observant. Married people who like prostitutes. So you mark that you're married, and somewhere around the web, maybe you did it on purpose, maybe not, you gave a thumbs up to prostitution. Okay? And if you like, again, Facebook's always very helpful, you could find these people's spouses. Okay? So now you start to get that feeling about things that seem disconnected, right? Pieces of data, and we're always told this, well, it's just metadata. It's not really personal. We just want to know these things so we can give you a customized web, right? Something that gives you the things, the exact things that you want, right? You start to realize that it can all become very personal very quickly. Tesco who like horses, that one's a little bit. Here's current employers of people who like racism. Okay, so somewhere along the line, I don't know why you would ever give a thumbs up to racism, but people do. There's a lot of white supremacists, there's a lot of people with strong feelings. You clicked it, and then you also could find out who they work for, like Target, or McDonald's, or the United States Air Force. Spouses of married people who like Ashley Madison. So Ashley Madison became very famous not long ago. They are a site for people who want to cheat, okay? So their tagline is, life is short, have an affair. Okay, so if you're married, but you want to have an affair, Ashley Madison will help you. And they were hacked not long ago. All of their data was taken, 30 million users, and is still making its way through the web, right? So here's people who've given Ashley Madison a thumbs up, and these are their spouses. Mothers of Catholics from Italy who like condoms. Family members, okay, so now here, the last one. Family members of people who live in China and like Falun Gong. Okay, so just as an explanation, China has some pretty strict laws about religion, and one of the outlawed groups in China is Falun Gong. Okay, if you're found practicing that religion, you're sent to a labor camp or to prison, or maybe you just disappear. Okay, because the government considers them a threat, right? So now here are people who like Falun Gong and have family members in China, because China doesn't allow Facebook, right? There's no Facebook in China. Okay? But if you're the Chinese government, gosh, would this be helpful? Because now you can figure out who their family members are, go to their house, and round them up, because Falun Gong's considered a threat. Okay? So this is what I mean about uncritical, right? Where we are often told that these things are not public, or that the information isn't going to say anything about you, but actually it can say a lot about you. Okay? So that's TMI. Then we have tracking and gathering. So what's the primary goal, right, of all of these apps? Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, WhatsApp. What's their number one goal? Making money, right? Yeah, you get friends. Yeah, you can share. Yeah, you can create networks and start revolutions, right? But Facebook, their number goal is making money, right? Lots of it. Right? Billions of dollars. And how do they make the money? Selling data, right? Your data. We all work for them, right? I haven't gotten my check yet. I don't know about you, but that's how they make their money. They gather the data about you that you create while you're on their sites, and then they sell that. And you help them do that, right? And so, just as an example, if you ever go and you take the time, which I recommend you all do, especially after this lecture, if you go to some of the settings, for instance, on Twitter, right, you get a lot of options, okay? Twitter will give you lots of options about what kind of data you can share. So the first is just security, right? That's good. And then when you go down to privacy, that's where it gets a little more interesting, right? The privacy is really about the data, right? It's one and the same in a way. So if you look at the settings within Twitter, photo tagging, allow anyone to tag me in their photos. That's some data. right? That's somebody else's network, they're gonna tag me, my photo's gonna go up on theirs, all of their viewers are gonna see it, and potentially their viewers' viewers are gonna see it, right? Tweet privacy, protect my tweets. Tweet location, add a location to my tweets. Hopefully, if you didn't know this, you do now. All tweets come tagged with location, unless you turn it off. And again, these are the defaults, right? It's not that you go in and add the things you want to share. You have to go in and tell Twitter, don't share, right? Don't say that thing about me. Don't share that data about me. It all has to be pulled back. Discoverability, let others find me. Address book, can I have access to your address book? Personalization, right? So tailor Twitter based on my recent website visits. So not websites within Twitter. Twitter wants to know where else you're going while you're using Twitter on your phone, on your laptop, on your iPad, right? Promoted content, can we tailor ads based on ad partners? Who knows who they are? They're out there. Allow anyone to add me to their team, etc. Right? So you get it. Right? They want to get as much data as they can because they need you to help them gather all that data and then resell it. So you help them, right? And claims of differences between what is anonymous and what is personal start to lose credibility, right? Remember the video that Dr. Paul showed, right, about Target, okay? And the young woman who was getting ads that showed that she was pregnant, right? And the dad was very upset. He said, why are you giving her? And then he found out, turns out she was, right? So this idea that, well, it's just metadata, it's not personal, it's not really about you, starts to not really look that way as we dig deeper into all of the data. And so I want to show you a short 5-minute video from TED Talks. And it's called Your Online Life Permanent as a Tattoo. Okay? And I think you'll find it pretty fascinating.
All right, so let's take 4 subjects that obviously go together. Big data, tattoos, immortality, and the Greeks, right? And the issue about tattoos is that without a word, tattoos really do shout. So you don't have to say a lot. And tattoos tell you a lot of stories. If I can ask an indiscreet question, how many of you have tattoos? A few, but not most. What happens if Facebook, Google, Twitter, LinkedIn, cell phones, GPS, Foursquare, Yelp, Travel Advisor, all these things you deal with every day turn out to be electronic tattoos? And what does they provide as much information about who and what you are as any tattoo ever would? What's ended up happening over the past few decades is the kind of coverage that you had as a head of state or as a great celebrity is now being applied to you every day by all these people who are tweeting, blogging, following you, watching your credit scores, and what you do to yourself. And electronic tattoos also shout. And as you're thinking of the consequences of that, it's getting really hard to hide from this stuff, among other things, because it's not just the electronic tattoos, it's facial recognition that's getting really good. So you can take a picture with an iPhone and get all the names. Although again, sometimes it does make mistakes. But that means you can take a typical bar scene like this, take a picture, say, of this guy right here, get the name, and download all the records before you utter a word or speak to somebody. Because everybody turns out to be absolutely plastered by electronic tattoos. And so there's companies like Face.com that now have about 18 billion faces online. Here's what happened to this company. There are other companies that will place a camera like this has nothing to do with Facebook. They take your picture, they tie it to the social media, they figure out you really like to wear black dresses. So maybe the person in the store comes up and says, hey, we've got 5 black dresses that would just look great on you. So what if Andy was wrong? Here's Andy's theory. What if we flip this? What if you're only going to be anonymous for 15 minutes? Well, then, because of electronic tattoos, maybe all of you and all of us are very close to immortality. Because these tattoos will live far longer than our bodies will. And if that's true, then what we want to do is we want to go through 4 lessons from the Greeks and 1 lesson from Latin America. Why the Greeks? Well, the Greeks thought about what happens when gods and humans and immortality mix for a long time. So lesson number 1, Sisyphus. Remember, did a horrible thing, condemned for all time to roll this rock up, it would roll back down, roll back up, roll back down. It's a little like your reputation. Once you get that electronic tattoo, you're going to be rolling up and down for a long time. So as you go through this stuff, just be careful what you post. Myth number 2, Orpheus. Wonderful guy, charming to be around, great partier, great singer, loses his beloved, charms his way into the underworld, only person to charm his way into the underworld, charms the gods of the underworld, they release his beauty on the condition he never look at her until they're out. So he's walking out and walking out and walking out, and he just can't resist. He looks at her, loses her forever. With all this data out here, it might be a good idea not to look too far into the past of those you love. Lesson number 3, Atalanta. Greatest runner. She would challenge anybody. If you won, she would marry you. If you lost, you died. How did Hippomenes beat her? Well, he had all these wonderful little golden apples, and she'd run ahead and he'd roll a little golden apple. She'd run ahead, he'd roll a little golden apple. She kept getting distracted. He eventually won the race. Just remember the purpose is all these little golden apples come and reach you, and you want to post about them or tweet about them or send a late-night message. And then, of course, there's Narcissus. Nobody here would ever be accused or be familiar with Narcissus. But as you're thinking about Narcissus, just don't fall in love with your own reflection. Last, a lesson from a Latin American. This is the great poet Jorge Luis Borges. When he was threatened by the thugs of the Argentine military junta, he came back and said, oh, come on, how else can you threaten other than with death? The interesting thing, the original thing, would be to threaten somebody with immortality. And that, of course, is what we are all now threatened with today because of electronic tattoos. Thank you.
Test. Oh, there we go. So I love this concept of digital tattoos, that they're invisible and yet they'll follow you around your whole life, right? And his points about Sisyphus, once something gets out there, you'll be constantly pushing it back up the hill, right? To not be distracted by the golden apples, to think clearly about what it is we're doing, to not look too far into the past of those who we love. I think these are really, really excellent guidelines for how we think about our life online. Okay, and final topic is government tracking and surveillance, right? Probably the most serious in many ways, especially in terms of our privacy, right? Because data that's shared with Target about us might be embarrassing, it might not be correct, we might wish that it wasn't out there, but data about us that the government receives that's wrong, or maybe that's right, can end us up in jail, right? Can put us in prison. So it has the most important impact, potential impacts on our lives. So, in the United States, since 9/11, September 11th, and the passage of what's called the Patriot Act, which was pushed through, through government very quickly while we were all very scared that there might be another attack, the gathering of information on Americans at home and abroad, right? So it used to be if you were just within the country, you couldn't be monitored, but if you were traveling abroad, you could, has expanded a lot, okay? And partly due to the internet, right? There's a lot more data out there to be seen. The tracking happens in secret and mostly in violation of the Fourth Amendment, right? Without a warrant, without probable cause, okay? Always under the argument that, well, it's just metadata, we're not actually listening to the conversations, we're just picking up when they're made and where they're going and at what time and to whom, right? And the stated goal is always to fight the war on terror, but it often has to do with lots of other things, okay? And it's very widespread, and we didn't really know all that much about it until just a few years ago. We had our suspicions, but then Edward Snowden came along and WikiLeaks and made it very clear that there's a lot of information being gathered about everyone in the world and that it really has become sort of a surveillance state. Google makes a lot of this information available, which I think is great. These are data requests by country, and you can see most of the data requests come from a particular country, right? But there are other countries around the world who are asking Google for data about their customers, right? We need the email records. We need the Google chats. We need the text sent through Google, right? We need something on the drive. Think about all the places and ways. We need their search histories. Think about all the ways we interact with just one company every day, right? And so they get a lot of requests. This production of data has been great for governments all over the world. And I'll just show you a couple of data points. This is from Google again. This is showing user data requests by country and percentage of data of requests where some data was produced, right? And were the accounts specified. So in this case, there were this many requests in Albania. 60% of those requests were granted, okay? In Australia, 70%, pretty high. Belgium, 72%. Bosnia-Herzegovina, 100%, but they only made one request, right? So you can see all around the country, governments are going to Google and asking for what we would call, quote unquote, private information. And you can go through this list, it's pretty interesting. France a lot, right? Europe is particularly concerned about terrorism, etc., feeling threatened. They make a lot of requests to Google. To their credit, I suppose, Google doesn't always comply. They don't always say yes, right? But most of the time they do, okay? And then of course, if we keep scrolling down, we see again who the number one requester is, which is the United States. And in their case, it's way more than any others. For that year, it was 12,000 requests, and Google granted those requests 80% of the time, okay? Almost all the time, basically. This news has been huge. This is some of the information that we learned when the Edward Snowden leaks were produced. That the National Security Agency was gathering information on Americans' private data from all of these companies and more, Sprint, T-Mobile, AT&T, Verizon. Every day, okay, every day, the NSA, which is the main security apparatus in the United States for monitoring electronic transmissions, et cetera, intercepts and stores 1.7 billion emails, phone calls, texts, and other electronic communications. That's equivalent to 138 million books every 24 hours. Talk about big data, right? They're building the NSA data center in the desert out in Las Vegas, which is a state in the United States. The new one is going to be 5.7 times the size of the US Capitol. There's never been a data center storage the size of this one, right? Because really the ultimate goal is to collect everything that's on the web, right? All of it. Full capture, they call it, right? And they look at everybody. They often don't have warrants. They often don't need probable cause. There is often no transparency, okay? And so this was big news, right? This was really important. And for not just in the United States, but all around the world. This is from Twitter, where they share, these are information requests that have been granted or presented to Twitter by different countries all around the world, right? And so this has been a really big deal, and it's been a big issue for journalists as well, right? Because how do we report on these things, right? Journalists who share the stolen information that Snowden came up with are often accused of helping to make the world less safe, right? And there's a clip, I won't show it now, but Glenn Greenwald's one of the main journalists involved in this work, and he pushes back very strongly against that and said, no, it's absolutely journalists' job to report on this because privacy is being compromised, and we value privacy very highly, right? And I have students every semester say, well, I'm not doing anything wrong, so I don't think I should worry about it. But it's not very many steps away from somebody who might be, that's in your network. And suddenly somebody you know, a friend you made on Facebook that you never talked to, is talking to somebody else who's talking to somebody else who is involved in something that the government's interested in, and now you're connected to them and having to describe like why and how and what did you do and when and where did you go, and you end up on a no-fly list, right? So even if this idea that you're not doing anything wrong seems plausible, it can become hugely problematic. Okay, I'm gonna wrap up here. So these are some of the issues when it comes to government surveillance and tracking. Paul mentioned this story the other day, right? Apple trying to get the government to unlock a phone that was used by a shooting that happened in California in the United States. And you know, on iPhones, if you put the wrong code in more than 10 times, all the data gets wiped out, right? It's a security feature that they started with the Apple 5C. And the government didn't have the code, and they knew if they kept doing it, it was gonna blank the phone, and they were sure there was something on there. So they kept going to Apple and saying, we need you to build some software so we can get into the phone. And Apple kept saying, no, we're not gonna do that, because that's just gonna open the door, and anytime you want into the phone, you're gonna get it. And the only part of that story that I'll share with you that didn't come up yesterday in Paul's talk is that they kept losing in court, the government kept asking Apple to do it, and then finally they said, oh, we unlocked it. They found a hacker and they unlocked the phone. It cost them like $1 million, right? So what does that say to me? It says that really the goal was not just to unlock that phone, right? That wasn't the point. The point was constant access to everybody's phone, right? And Apple, to their credit, fought back. They said this is a free speech issue. You're forcing us to build something that we don't want to do, right? You can't force us to do something that we don't want to do. And they, in one of their arguments, one of the lawyers wrote, what is to stop the government from demanding that Apple write code and turn on the microphone in native government surveillance, activate the video camera, surreptitiously record conversations, or turn on location services to track the user's phone, right? And their argument is always, look, if you have probable cause and there's something on a phone that we can unlock and you give us a warrant, we'll do it, right? That's what the law says. But that's not what the government was asking for, okay? And so Apple, I think really, and I don't always agree with what they do, in this case they fought back and they were supported by a lot of people who said, look, this is one step too far. We will always be happy to help the government if you bring us a warrant and you show probable cause. That's what the Fourth Amendment asks for. But what you're doing is impinging on our First Amendment rights, which is freedom of expression, right? And they won. So that's the overview of privacy and profit and security in the digital age. And I realize it's kind of a dark view, right? It makes you want to throw your phone away, okay? But in the spirit of Henry Jenkins and a lot of what we've been talking about in here the last couple of days, I want to share a few examples of ways in which this conversation is making its way into the public, ways in which people are pushing back and imagining other ways to think about privacy and data. This is a group called the No Not Bored Theater Company. And they have this group called the Surveillance Camera Players. Okay? And what they will do is go into a public space and find the surveillance cameras and then put on a show for the cameras and whoever's looking at them. Okay? So I'll show you a couple of clips from one of their productions, one of their shows called I Have Amnesia, Please Help Me. And it starts with a guy, and they film all of it, right? I'm the surveillance camera player. The surveillance camera players present Amnesia by Daniel Bibos. I have amnesia. You are watching me all day, everywhere I go. Baby, you can help. Okay? So they're taking art, right? They're taking this imaginative, creative process to push back a little bit and say no. And I love on their homepage, there's a quote at the top that says, only someone completely distrustful of all government would be opposed to what we are doing with surveillance cameras. And this was the New York City Police Commissioner, Howard Safir. And so their tagline is, the surveillance camera players, completely distrustful of all government, right? Because they say, who's looking at the footage? Where's it going? If I'm always being filmed, Who's looking at it? So that's one example. Another is something very recent that we've talked about Harry Potter in here, right? So Daniel Radcliffe is currently starring in a play that's on, I think it's off Broadway, but it's in New York. It started in London, and it's called Privacy. And the whole show is about a young guy who's depressed. He's just split up with his girlfriend. He moves to the city, and he's feeling very anonymous and alone. But the more he learns about what's out there about him, the more he realizes that we're really never alone anymore, right? And it's interactive. So when you walk in, they actually tell you, don't turn off your phones, turn them on. And then tweet and talk about the show as it's going on, and people see their information projected up on the screen. And then sort of like that video I was showing, they'll actually pick people out of the audience and be like, oh, hey, you from Brooklyn, New York, right? What are you? And so they start pushing the privacy information out at the audience, right? Really trying to get people to engage in what all of this might mean. I was gonna show this, but I won't. If you haven't seen the documentary Citizen 4, okay, it's about Edward Snowden. It was produced by Laura Poitras, who's one of the journalists that Edward Snowden went to when he knew that he had all this information. And he picked her because she's been known to always protect her sources. She uses encrypted email and encrypted text messaging to talk with people. And so he went to her, and it's a beautiful film. It won the Oscar last year for Best Documentary in the United States. And it really lays out the whole sort of situation that Edward Snowden was trying to expose. This is an online documentary called Do Not Track. And it's really fascinating. It's interactive. And so as you're, I'll just play you, this is just the trailer.
Have you noticed the internet getting creepier? It used to feel like a fun, magical place. But these days, something feels off. It seems like a few companies are getting rich, and the rest of us get tracked. And the more things are targeted to us, the less equal we become. So a group of makers and public media folks got together to explore what is happening. From our mobile phones to social networks, from personalized advertising to big data. Every 2 weeks, we'll release a new personalized documentary with a different perspective. We want you to understand the value of your privacy. So we're going to ask you to let us track you. During each episode of Do Not Track, you'll be able to use your own data to understand how information about you is used by others. We'll give you more knowledge so you'll have more power. Let's track the trackers together.
So you go to the site, you can go to the website, and it's interactive, and so you put in information, and as the documentary is playing, he actually says, I can see that you're using a Mac and that, etc., right? And so as the documentary is playing, you are engaged with the information that you're producing, right? And he actually builds that into the documentary. It's fascinating. It won a big award last year called the Peabody Award for Journalism. And then the last thing I'll share with you is just an artist named Hassan Alahi. He's a Bangladeshi American, and he's a creative artist, conceptual artist. And in 2002, as he was flying back into the United States, he was stopped by the FBI. Somehow he had ended up on their watch list, and they just started asking him everything about his life. They wanted to know every single thing about him, and he's very open. He had nothing to hide. They spent 4 hours talking in the airport. Finally, they said, well, okay, we're going to let you go, but we need you to check in with the local FBI office tomorrow in Tampa, Florida, in the United States, where he lived. So he went the next day. They gave him polygraphs. Again, he got caught in this loop, right? Somehow his name matched somebody else's name. This was a year after 9/11. And so now he was spending almost every day going to the FBI office, talking with them. They couldn't believe that he wasn't really up to something. And so he decided that what he would do is, rather than having them pull the information, he would push it. And so he started emailing the FBI every time he would go somewhere. He'd say, I'm going to Toronto tomorrow. Here's my flight number. Here's the hotel where I'll be staying. Here's what I'm going to be doing while I'm there. Just wanted to let you know. And then he said, well, what else could I do? He said, oh, so he started taking pictures. Every meal that he ate, he would send. Every hotel room that he slept in. Everywhere he gassed up, and he travels a lot. He developed a tracker. This was kind of early GPS. He developed a tracking device for his phone that would put his location on a map. He sent that to the FBI. Right? So it was his way of sort of saying, look, if you want to know everything about me, here it is. Right? I'm putting it out there. And his artwork got a lot of attention, right? So I think that, you know, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by all of this, and there are ways that we can hide data, and I'm happy to answer questions about that. But also I'd like to just point that there are people who are trying to engage in this because we're all aware now, right? So now what the question becomes, like, what do we do next? What do we do personally? What do we do publicly? How do we engage with this and not feel like it's just this big Orwellian system that we're stuck in, right? Because that's not necessarily the case. So I'll stop there, and we have a few minutes for questions. Thank you. Yeah, in the back, you've had your hand up for a while.
It is more of a comment rather than a question. You showed us a video talking about tattoos and that we all have electronic tattoos, but we're also electronically naked. Now, some people refuse to show their bodies, but some people have the choice to actually expose them. Now, I think that we must know that the forms of online communication betray us invisibly, and that's what you've been talking about in this lecture. And I think we all gonna stay media illiterate unless we know forms of protecting ourselves. If we didn't learn that, we're gonna keep on being illiterate.
Yeah, I know, I couldn't agree more. And it's sort of like the other day after the political economy talk, and we said, what do we do? Well, education is such a good first step. And more people are giving us ways to hide what we do. We can encrypt our emails now. WhatsApp is double encrypted until Facebook decides it's not. But for now, WhatsApp is double encrypted. It's encrypted when I send you a message, and it's encrypted a second time when you receive it. Almost impossible to read WhatsApp messages, right? And the governments hate it, right? They really wish that were not the case. They wish that iPhones wouldn't delete themselves after 5 or 10 tries, right? But there are things that we can do. But you're right, you are naked until you choose to put some clothes on, right? Versus you have your clothes on and then you can show what you want. But we're not in that, just like the Twitter options that I showed you, right? When you create a Twitter account, all of those privacy settings are set to full open, right? Full naked. And it's up to you to put some clothes on, right? So it's a very good point.
شكرا للمحاضرة الجميلة. في عندي سؤال من قسمين. القسم الأول إنه إحنا كيف فينا نثق بالشركات الموجودة من ناحية حتى خيارات الخصوصية اللي هي طرحها لنا مثل إلغاء الأماكن أو شيء، وخاصة إنه شركة مثل واتساب في الفترة الأخيرة وضعت خيار المحادثة السرية، وهذا الخيار كتير أثار جدل. الشق الثاني من السؤال إنه إحنا حتى لو أخذنا كل هاي الاعتبارات شو بيحمينا من الهكر سواء داخل الشركات أو خارجها، بمعنى إنه حتى الجوال نفسه والابليكيشنز اللي بتنزل عليه كلها بتاخد إذن للدخول على صورنا وعلى الإيميلات وعلى الأرقام التليفون الموجودة. فبصير بالنهاية إنه إحنا أسلم طريقة للسلامة من هذا العري الإلكتروني أو الوشم الإلكتروني عنا هو البعد عن التقنية نفسها، وهذا شبه مستحيل تقريبا في ظل إنه شغلنا الإعلامي على الأقل ربطنا غصبا عنا بهذه الأشياء.
Okay, so there were two questions. One is, how do we trust the companies when they say that they're going to protect our privacy? And the second was, how do we protect ourselves from hackers and those who might choose to steal our data, right? So the first one about trusting the companies. Well, I think the easy answer is we can't, right? We can't, because we've seen that. We have evidence that shows that even when they said they weren't sharing information with the government, they were, right? The beautiful thing about it is that because they are operating within a free market system, when this information came out, it looked really bad for them. And it was going to hurt the bottom line, how much money they could make, right? So Google, Facebook, right, these companies, they are going to protect your privacy only so much as it's within their business interests, right? And maybe public relations to some extent, but the two are very connected, right? And so I think, you know, Edward Snowden did us all a very big favor when he sort of exposed this, because since then, companies like Apple, right? They fought back, right? They fought back not just because they thought, well, this is a First Amendment issue and Fourth Amendment, but also because they knew that it was going to hurt them and their sales, because more and more people, just like you in this room and all over the world, are becoming more aware about how much data is out there, who has it, who's sharing it, etc. So I do think that there is going to continue to be a pushback, right, against sort of this constant surveillance, right? So like, for instance, the dark web, right, which is sort of the unseen part of the web, the unsearchable part of the web, is becoming very, very popular, right? And not just to do things that are illegal, which is kind of how it was used initially, but for journalists to and get in touch with their sources. You could use it to do banking, right? There's lots of things that we can do on the dark web that more and more people are doing because of that. In terms of our danger to hackers, right? This is a little harder, right? I mean, that really becomes about us, right? How safe are you with your data, right? When you're using a public Wi-Fi network, right, at a cafe, how careful are you being about what you do, right? If you're on a public Wi-Fi network, you're very exposed. You have to know that, right? How careful are you with your passwords? When you log on somewhere, are you always sure to log off, right? Are you constantly tracking and keeping an eye out for how safe you are online? And so there's never going to be a time when we're completely safe on the web, but we can do things that will make us safer, right? And part of that is just being aware. Because sometimes we're so caught up in this thing, we're just on them all the time, and we're so busy that we lose a critical distance from thinking about, well, what have I shared, and who might have access to it. So yeah, in terms of companies, I think they see it as a bottom line. They see it as an economic problem. And so I think their issues towards privacy is about money. And then I think for us, when it comes to our own online identity, we have to be careful, because nobody else is really going to protect us.
بجدد الشكر طبعا في المحاضرة القيمة. سؤال: كيف نوفق ما بين الحصول على المعلومات من وسائل التواصل الاجتماعي مثل الفيسبوك وبين تقنية التأكد من صدقيتها، وإلى أي مدى يمكن الاعتماد عليها في ظل وجود صحافة المواطنة التي ليس لها منصات سوى التواصل الاجتماعي، خاصة أن هذه المعلومات اللي ممكن تصدر عنها ممكن نستفيد منها إحنا كوسائل إعلامية.
So, I mean, the question is more about information, right? And what information do we get online? Can we trust that information? If people are only using social media, I mean, so that's not so much about data and security. And I'm sure there are other, like I know, like in Paul's talk, he's going to talk more about sort of media literacy and those kind of aspects. But the thing I would say is that the news and information that shows up either on Google or on Facebook that we're receiving is coming through an algorithm, right? So they're making choices about what we're going to see, whose information is going to reach our news feed based on things we've clicked on before, right? And so I think partly what you have to do is be diverse in terms of who you follow and the networks that you're a part of, so that they're not filtering out, right, information that you might not otherwise receive. And in terms of news groups that only rely on social media, you have to just find out who they are, right? Just like you would with any other newspaper or television station. Who are their journalists, right? Who's funding the organization, right? Who's the owner of the company that's funding the organization? Look at their content and figure out, well, can I verify this? Or are there other people reporting on this, right? And so I know, like, within the Syrian conflict, for instance, everybody involved in that conflict has a camera, is shooting videos, right? Is reporting from the front lines. But through what perspective, right? And it all goes out on YouTube and it all goes out on Facebook. And so yeah, I think for us, and especially as journalists, we have to be really critical about what's reaching us, how it's getting to us, what's being filtered out, what's being left in, and then verifying the credibility of those sources. I think it's incredibly important. So I think we have time for maybe one more question. Was there? Yes.
الكثير منا يلجأ إلى ذكر معلومات ربما تكون بعيدة عن الواقع، يعني بين قوسين معلومات كاذبة. في كثير خاصة في مواقع التواصل الاجتماعي يخفي معلومات شخصية ويذكر معلومات أخرى عنه. هل يمكن أنه تكون هذه المعلومات الحل الوحيد لحماية خصوصيتنا؟
Right, so the question is, can we create separate identities, right? And is that a way to protect ourselves? be somebody who we're not, right? And it's a really interesting question because yes, right? The answer is in some sense yes, and a lot of people do use the web to hide their identity, to be somebody else, whether it's for personal reasons, you know, I have a lifestyle that I'm trying to keep secret from my parents or my family, or I'm a journalist and I'm trying to get in touch with an important source, but I can't be completely open, whatever it might be. And so there is that possibility, but you know, in the past, like Facebook, for instance, they insist that you be who you say you are, right? They don't allow for anonymous accounts. Twitter is a little bit easier, right? But they at one point decided, well, this is what we're gonna do. Everybody has to be who they say they are on Facebook, right? And that seems like a good initiative, but what if you want to be a part of Facebook, but don't really want everybody to know who you are, right? And so there are big issues about that. And at one point there's a group in the United States, and I'm sure here as well, they're called cosplayers. So they dress up as their favorite characters and they go to big conventions and they read comic books, right? And they have separate identities. And they were creating those identities on Facebook, and Facebook was deleting their accounts. And yet this is a really important part of who they are, right? It's their identity, but they are that other person. Finally, Facebook backed down, and if they they had to like fax in their license or something, they would allow them to create a second account. So I think it's a really important distinction, and yes, I think people have been able to do it, both for good and bad, right? They set up these fake accounts in order to fool people, right? In order to get their money or start some sort of relationship that is false. But at the same time, a lot of people have used social networks to protect themselves, right? And so it's that constant back and forth. There's a tension there between being who we are online and companies telling us we have to be who we are, and then all of those reasons that we might not want to share exactly who we are. So there's a real dichotomy there, and it has a lot to do with privacy and who we are. So it's a very good point. And I don't think we've completely figured it out, but it does allow for that, so it's important. So thank you all very much, I appreciate it.